Oh, today we have to discuss Susan Delbene's data protection bill, House bill. It looks like the most likely to move forward at this point, although hopefully it will not. As you'll see, it is a cataclysmic disaster. It's one of the worst bills I've ever seen, and it's on this vitally important issue. The question of what rights individual Americans have to control how their data is collected and used. It's going to be one of the most profoundly important questions over the next several decades. It will have a greater impact on your day-to-day life than any other bill that is passed. And this thing is a cataclysmic disaster. It is embarrassing. But we'll get to that. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Let's do this. H.R. 1816. First of all, Susan Delbene is a former Microsoft and tech company executive. She is from Washington. I believe Microsoft is in her district. And this is a bill that is primarily concerned with regulating big tech and tech companies in general. I mean, it certainly applies to everyone, and it's bigger than that. But it's extremely concerning that she's the point person on this. But, you know, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily bad. What means it's bad is the text of the bill itself. In Europe, there's they passed in 2016 the GDPR, which is a General Data Protection Regulations. It's a general data protection bill, meaning it applies broadly to virtually everything. It's a very comprehensive scheme. It's a 271-page bill. And it has been met with a lot of consternation by the business community. It's been a ton of red tape. It is difficult to deal with, very inconvenient. And some of the things have gone off, some of the provisions have certainly come off less smoothly than one might have hoped. However, it does do a lot of really important things, and I don't think, while there's no question that a lot of people have a lot of bad things to say about it, particularly American lawyers, IP lawyers like myself. We have run into a lot of inconvenience over it, and because that's what we're seeing more than the benefits to individuals, you know, we get frustrated. But the fact is, there's a lot of good going on with that bill. In the United States, we don't have that. We have no federal general data protection bill or privacy bill. We do have a few specific privacy bills or data protection bills, but they're things like HIPAA, FERPA, COPA that are intended to protect specific types of data in specific circumstances, and most of them are much less comprehensive than we might suppose. For example, HIPAA, most people think of as a health information protection bill, but it's really not. It's a bill that's designed to make it possible for health insurance companies to process claims, and it's much less concerned with protecting our health data than we tend to suppose. I mean, it does do that to a large extent, don't get me wrong, but it is not as comprehensive as we might wish. There are individual states that do have general data protection bills or privacy bills. Most famously California, which passed one that went into effect last year, and that is pretty comprehensive. Again, for the same reasons that GDPR has not been particularly well liked by lawyers and lobbyists in the business community, the California bill is not particularly well liked. And to be fair, these regulations are far from perfect, so there's a lot to pick at with them. But it does go a long way toward giving individuals more control over how their data is collected and used. Several other states have since passed bills similar to California's. I believe Virginia has, Colorado did just this month. And then a few states have passed what should probably be more accurately called anti-privacy bills, because they seem to actually go the other way. But we have made progress. The other thing we have that is relevant to this, there are various bills that protect certain privacy issues, and one of the ones that's been important over the last 7 to 10 years or so is nearly every jurisdiction that's now passed a revenge porn statute, a non-consensual pornography statute that criminalizes posting pornographic pictures or intimate pictures of somebody without their consent. But more importantly, they make it possible to get those things taken down from the, generally major tech companies that are hosting the pictures or the content or the, whatever it is. So that's been actually very helpful in a lot of cases, at least that I saw in my practice, where we were trying to help somebody with a revenge porn situation. It's a big privacy issue. This bill, in fact, not only Representative Delbene's bill, but there are 3 bills in the Senate and actually another one that may be introduced in the House. We'll keep an eye out for it. But all of these bills are general data protection bills at the federal level, and they all explicitly preempt all state privacy laws. So that will mean that all of the progress that's been made in individual states will be reversed if the regulation itself does not provide as significant, protections nearly as significant or as significant as the individual states' bills. And in fact, states will not be allowed to pass new bills that are more robust than the federal bill, because these bills are intended to be a comprehensive regulatory scheme. They're said to occupy the field, meaning that states cannot pass laws that would change those regulations, because the U.S. Constitution has a supremacy clause that says that the federal law is the supreme law of the land, and it trumps these state laws. So these bills may be fine. If a bill is passed at the federal level, even though it may specifically preempt some state laws, if it's well thought out and it's well conceived and it has appropriate protections, it's actually a great thing, because it'll make it possible to do business across jurisdictions without having to constantly worry about which privacy laws apply and what has to be done. So that would be a great thing. But like I said, it's got to be done right. This bill that we're talking about today does not do it right. So the first thing I noticed looking at HR 1816, and I'll put a link to it in the description below, is it's about 20 pages long, which, I mean, certainly legislation cannot be scored just based on how long it is, but it's concerning to see such a broad, important, complex, nuanced issue being dealt with in 20 pages. It sort of suggests that not enough thought has been put into this. GDPR was 271 pages, and it had its own problems, to be sure, but that was being taken very seriously. This, I just immediately am concerned when I see it's only 20 pages. It also gives me the impression that it was cranked out in a hurry, and there's typos in it, there's obvious problems, and that reinforces that impression. So any regulatory scheme's got to have some sort of enforcement mechanism. The 2 general types of enforcement are public or private. Private enforcement is usually a private right of action for individuals who are injured or harmed by, in this case, it would be if the improper collection or use of your data, misuse of your data, or if it were negligently stored and there was a data breach and you were damaged by that. You could bring a lawsuit yourself to recover damages or to get made whole. The other type of enforcement is public enforcement. It's just typically an attorney general of a state or a regulatory agency that will enforce it at the federal level. In this case, it would be the FTC that would be primarily concerned with enforcing this. So this bill explicitly prohibits any private right of action whatsoever, meaning normally you would expect to see a combination of both public and private enforcement for something this complex. You might curtail private rights of action, maybe even significantly, because you don't want there to be a bunch of frivolous lawsuits. You don't want it to be, a good business plan to just file a lot of lawsuits over data breaches, or excuse me, over perceived data issues or technical violations of a law like this. But on the other hand, you don't want there to be no recourse for an individual who's severely impacted by a breach of this law or these regulations, and there's nothing they can do. Under this regulatory scheme, or the regulatory scheme contemplated by this bill, all enforcement would be done by the FTC, and then if the FTC was informed of an issue and refused to do anything about it, then state attorneys general would have the right after 60 days to bring their own actions. That's fine. Those are both useful ways of enforcing regulation, but it's totally inadequate for something this broad unless there are significant resources dedicated to it. This is a regulation that's going to apply to virtually every bit of data that's collected in this country. I mean, there'll be a few exceptions. It doesn't apply to very, very small operations. You know, you don't want it to apply to like a person keeping their contacts in their cell phone or whatever. But realistically, virtually every business is going to have to be concerned with these regulations and follow them. And large businesses are going to have to submit under this regulation to a information audit, which they will have to pay an independent company to perform, but that will have to be supervised by the regulatory authority, the FTC. The enforcement mechanism is entirely dependent on the FTC with, we can assume, some amount of help from state attorneys general. The resources that are going to be dedicated to this better be significant. And let's look in the bill to find out what is contemplated. The bill provides for $350 million and 500 employees to handle enforcement of regulations on every bit of data in the United States. That is absurd. That's just laughable. 500 employees? Okay. There's no perfect analogy here because it's a different thing, but let's just try to get a ballpark figure. TransUnion is the smallest credit reporting agency in the United States. It has 8,000 employees for a credit reporting agency. They just deal with your credit information. And they don't enforce anything. They just maintain a database. I get that they have some business operations, but still, 8,000 employees. The largest credit reporting agency has nearly 18,000 employees. The European Union provides for 500,000 data protection officers in the EU. Now, those are officers that are appointed by private entities to be the point person for their data protection issues. They don't all work for the government. But if there are 500,000 of them, there has to be somebody on the other side of all of those conversations. I'll grant you the EU has twice as many people as the United States, a little more than twice as many people. But even if you assume there's going to be 250,000 data protection officers in U.S. companies, that means you've got 500 people to set up the agency, enforce it, liaise with 250,000 people from various companies. I mean, it's just comically stupid. This is a project that is doomed to failure. And why did they do it? Oh, it's because they wanted to make sure that they didn't provide any private right of action. So they wanted to make it seem like they were doing something to make this regulation matter. But just a minute, we're going to find out that they had no intention of this regulation actually mattering at all. So this does provide some fairly significant restrictions on how data is to be handled by what the statute calls data controllers and data processors. However, it has a list of exemptions. That is, it excludes a whole class of activity that is absurdly broad. The first one that raises a big red flag is this section called reasonable expectation of users. and it says, as long as you're just using the data the way that your customers would reasonably expect, then you don't have to worry about this. These regulations do not apply. So who's to say whether you're using it consistently? Because it explicitly eliminates any private right of action. If somebody were not using it the way that you reasonably expected, you would not be able to bring a lawsuit to do anything about it. Now, theoretically, the FTC could, but there's only going to be 500 people at the FTC doing everything. I mean, the IRS has 75,000 employees and a $12 or $13 billion budget. Anybody who's ever tried to call the IRS knows how totally absurdly impossible it is to get somebody on the phone for the most part. This is going to be 500 people for the entire country, not just your tax information, not just your taxes, all of the data that is collected in the country, 500 people. It'll be like a 3-year wait time, and then you'll get kicked to an answering machine. So you're not ever going to get any public enforcement of this. I mean, maybe your state attorney general would do something for you. They could notify the FTC that they think that somebody was a bad actor, and then wait 60 days and then bring their own action, I suppose. But let's face it, you and I, anybody who doesn't have, hundreds of millions of dollars is not going to get any attention. They're not going to get any of their grievances addressed. And apparently, as long as the person who has your data thinks that they are using it the way you would reasonably expect, they're good to go anyway. But it gets better. So there is just a list of exemptions provided. And some of these make some amount of sense, but most of them are just totally inexplicable. So this regulation will not apply if to the processing, transmission, collecting, storing, sharing, selling of sensitive and non-sensitive personal information for the following purposes. I'm not going to read them all because there's too many, but I'm going to go through some of the ones that are just amazing. The first one, preventing or detecting fraud, identity theft, unauthorized transactions, theft, shoplifting, or criminal activity, including financial crimes. So I don't have to follow this as long as I can plausibly claim that my selling, I mean, anything I want to do with your data, but particularly selling seems concerning to me. My selling of your data was in the interest of preventing or detecting fraud or crime or identity theft. Well, this is absurd. That means whoever has is storing my data. That means if I have access to a tremendous amount of data, let's say I'm a big tech company and I have millions of users' data, millions of users' messages, millions of email messages, and just all this data that I'm storing, and I think, hey, you know what? You know who prevents crime? Private investigators. They're interested in preventing crime and identity theft, and the police and the FBI. I'm going to go to police departments and the FBI and private investigators, and I'm going to sell them this data because, hey, it's in the interest of preventing crime. This is going to stop crime because these people, they want to stop crime. I'm just helping them to do it. And look, I make millions of dollars by selling your data. I could even sell your private, like the contents of your email messages because, hey, if the FBI can read those and they find out you're up to a crime, then, hey, they can stop it. That's super helpful. This is fantastic. If using your information is being used to identify errors that impair functionality of your service, or otherwise, if I want to use your data to enhance or maintain the availability of services, then I don't have to worry about these requirements. So all I have to do is say, no, I'm feeding all of your data to the AI algorithm to help to make my app better. I'm I'm selling your data to raise money to help make my app better or to keep my servers running. I don't. There's no limit to how absurd this can get. Let's see. One other one that just stands out, and any lawyer would instantly key in on this one. Protecting the vital interests of the consumer or another natural person. Protecting the vital interests of a consumer or another natural person. Doesn't say which natural person. It doesn't matter. This is so. For instance, nobody knows what vital interests means. So I'm going to say my vital interest is making a lot of money, and I've got a bunch of data, and I'm a natural person, and I want to protect my vital interests by selling your data to make a lot of money to protect my vital interests. These regulations don't apply. I can do anything I want with it. I can transfer it. I can leave it on an open FTP server for anyone to collect. Doesn't matter as long as I'm protecting my vital interests, because I'm a natural person, or realistically anyone else that I want. So this is just absurd. This list of exceptions is so broad that when I first read it, I instantly thought this makes this essentially not apply to anyone. Any lawyer could make almost any use of data fit into one of these exceptions plausibly. I actually took this up. One of my committees had a meeting with Representative Delbene's office or their legislative assistant, and we asked them about this, and they said, "Oh, I can think of a lot of things that this would stop that wouldn't fall into any of these exceptions." So that's the standard. If there's things that you can think of that wouldn't fall into an exception, it's good to go. Doesn't matter that you can think of a whole lot of horrific things that would fall into an exception. That's not what they were worried about. Their standard from their own mouth was, I can think of a lot of things that wouldn't fall into one of these exceptions. So that's how concerned they are with actually protecting data. This is what you get, though. This is a Microsoft and tech executive-led bill. They are going to be interested in making things easy for a company like Microsoft or a tech company, which, fine, but don't try to pretend you're protecting individuals' data. And this is the fundamental problem with this entire discussion, is the most important stakeholders are not the ones that are being consulted about this stuff. It's giant tech companies and lawyers, and like IP lawyers like myself. It does not matter if some IP lawyers are inconvenienced. I understand where they're coming from. I get it. It's extremely frustrating when some of these bills are difficult to understand. They are difficult to know how to make sure you're advising your clients properly about them. I understand the headache that GDPR caused. I was there on the front lines for it. But guess what? That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if a bunch of lawyers are irritated and inconvenienced and want to make snappy comments about how annoying a law is. In the scheme of things, a giant tech company is going to be fine. These lawyers are going to be fine. In fact, they're going to get to bill more. They'll be happier because they had so much work they had to do on this stuff. And the most important stakeholders are individuals, families, children who are young or unborn, who we need to protect their ability to grow up in a world where they get to be people without having every aspect of their lives digitized, tracked, and immortalized so that they can never outrun it, so that their data follows them everywhere, from school to job opportunities to anything else they may want to do, so that we don't create this underclass of people who were unlucky enough to have their data get tracked, and every indiscretion and every mistake and every embarrassing thing they ever did, they can never live down because it's everywhere and they have no ability to stop it. And worse, their entire lives will end up being dictated by algorithms that are built up using their data to manipulate them and take control of far more of their lives than we ever thought possible. It's shocking. It's absurd. This bill is unbelievably disastrous. There's one more thing that I got to cover on this bill before we move on, and that is the preemption provision. I'm very sympathetic to the need to have a uniform privacy regulation or data protection regulation across the country. It'd be very nice. It'd be very helpful. I'm all for it if it's done right. This bill explicitly preempts state privacy laws, including, for all intents and purposes, nullifying every revenge porn law in the country. Now, admittedly, there may be a criminal portion of revenge porn laws that would remain intact. In other words, it may still be illegal to upload pornography to without consent. But that's not really the point of those laws. I mean, the most important part of those laws is to make it possible for you to get that stuff taken down by the data processors or that are storing it, that are making it available, these giant tech companies usually. If you don't have the ability to rely on a statute that requires them to take it down, they're not going to. Or if they do, they'll be reluctant to. It'll be much more difficult. This law goes so far as to specifically preempt every state privacy law, but make sure that it's saving specific laws that allow the government to collect your data. But it doesn't bother to save the revenge porn laws. It's absolutely absurd. I'm not suggesting that Representative Delbene is in the pocket of big, terrible ex-boyfriend, but it shows that this has not been thought out. No time or attention was put into this. The obvious, clear goal of this legislation is to get preemption of all the state privacy laws for her big tech clients and to make it easier for businesses to just collect all the data they want. It's absurd. It's an insult to civil liberties in our country. And it doesn't matter where you are on the political spectrum. This is absolutely just a nightmare. I hope everybody will voice their strenuous objection to this if it should move out of committee. Talk about it. The most important thing we can do right now is talk about it, educate ourselves, talk to your friends, family, colleagues, clients, share this video, or make your own videos and share those. I'm not trying to build a YouTube channel here. I would love to get the word out. I would love for this to be useful to people. This really is one of the most important issues of our generation. Please share it. Get the word out. Let's make our voices heard. Let's make sure that it's not just tech executives and IP lawyers that are setting the standard for what it means to be an individual in our society in the next coming decades. Thanks so much for watching. You're awesome. See you in the next one.